All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Obviously, no practice on Sunday, but there still was a lot of news and is a lot of news to cover today. We'll get to all the latest Parsons drama towards the end. There's some interesting updates about some guys breaking through in Cowboys camp that are really doing some good things. But like we always do here, let's get started with our stat of the day. Get some interesting comments about the stats and the charts I pull up, but I'm going to keep doing them because I think they're interesting. So, let's pull up today's one. I think it's pretty interesting. So this is the most wins over the last 10 seasons in the National Football League. We got the Kansas City Chiefs at the top, then the Steelers and the Bills, Baltimore, Green Bay, Minnesota, Philadelphia, Seattle, New England, and then Dallas, bringing up the rear 10th most in terms of wins in the NFL over the past 10 seasons. So there's a lot of different things to unpack here, a lot of different ways to take this. One of the things I've heard in terms of the big media guys, the ESPNs, the Fox Sportses, and things like that, these commentators, they talk about, oh, the Cowboys, they're an embarrassing franchise. This is a terrible franchise. And I understand you can look at that from the media and the hype and the publicity, and you can look at the lack of Super Bowl wins and the lack of postseason success and agree with that. But on a strictly wins basis, it's important to understand they're top 10 over the past decade with a lot of volatility, right? We're talking multiple head coaches, changing coordinators, multiple generations of guys coming in and out, starting with a rookie quarterback in Dak Prescott, progressing to paying him a lot of money, not once but twice, multiple generations of star wide receivers and star defenders, so on and so forth, changing coordinators through COVID, before COVID, pre-COVID, however you want to look at it. The Cowboys have been top 10 in the NFL, along with a lot of really other, I will say, landmark franchises over the past decade. But for people who want to point to Super Bowl success or bust, I want to bring up some of the guys on this list. The Pittsburgh Steelers have won, I think, one playoff game since 2015? Right? They haven't won a playoff game since the 2016 season. So again, Pittsburgh Steelers, a lot of games, no playoff victories. How about the Buffalo Bills, right? They have MVP quarterback, one of the best in football, Josh Allen, great coach, great organization. You ask Cowboys fans, they would kill for that kind of organization. How many Super Bowl titles do the Bills have? How about the Baltimore Ravens? Zero, none over the past decade. How about the Packers? Right? How many titles have they had? They had Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love. They crushed it with the LaFleur hiring. Really solid, stable organization according to all the smart talking heads. What have they done? What Super Bowl champions are they bringing? What parades are they throwing? Minnesota Vikings, right? Winning a lot of games. It's all the Vikings seem to do. Very Cowboys-esque, but always seem to not do anything in the postseason. Where's the media hit there? Right, the Eagles, they're the opposite, right? They've made it to three Super Bowls and won two, right? They've gotten it done. Credit where credit is due. Seattle Seahawks, very much like Dallas. Of course, the tail end of the Legion of Boom. What have they done since? A lot of winning in the regular season, not much in the postseason to speak of at all. And they've had good coaches, good quarterbacks, everything you want. Supposedly good organization. I think they are. But where's the media hit on Seattle? And then, of course, the Patriots, their transition, this was at the tail end of their dynasty, so they were winning, of course. They've done a lot less over the past couple of years before we get to Dallas at number 10 there. So I think it's important to understand you can be very critical for the lack of championship success, but you also have to take a step back and realize that in terms of winning during the regular season and winning football games, the Cowboys are the top 10 in the National Football League. But really not quite top quartile, top 25%, but pretty close when it's all said and done. And despite that, they get trashed on more than a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who have done no postseason winning. Seattle, Buffalo, Baltimore, Green Bay, Pittsburgh, right? A lot of those teams, they don't get any of the negative media attention. They don't get any of the disregarding attacks on their ownership and franchises. And look, Jerry Jones brings it on himself. I'm not excusing Jerry Jones. I'm not excusing the Cowboys leadership. They bring it upon themselves. A lot of it's self-inflicting. But when you see the media hits and you see the attacks, understand that it's not coming from a place of intelligence. It's not coming from a place of actual football insights. Because if it was coming from a place of football insights, every time they would ran a hit on Dallas, they would look at Seattle, Minnesota, Green Bay, Baltimore, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh and say the exact same things, and arguably more because they've had better quarterbacks and more wins over that time period. Nothing against Prescott. I just think guys like Jackson are better. For example, Josh Allen is better, for example. But you don't get that. And I think that's important to remember as we deal through all the media attention and publicity. Understand that all these talking heads, all these people in the media, all these guys that are writers for articles and things like that, understand they're not reporting on Dallas from a place of intelligence. They're reporting on a place of emotion and trying to drive clicks and engagement, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just understand that. All right, let's move into some news, some stories. Again, on a kind of slow Sunday, didn't have a whole lot going on. But this was a couple days ago. I want to circle back to this. This was courtesy of Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star. Great follow. I know it's kind of hard to read here. I try to pull the screen grab off of X. He posted Elijah Clark, undrafted free agent. defensive back, had hit on Jalen Tolbert, attempted right over the middle, that jarred the ball loose. 2 plays later, an interception. Great day for the undrafted free agent. So Clark, and I bring this up because Clark was a guy, we had talked about heading into camp as someone to keep an eye on as an undrafted guy, as a maybe in a safety room that's getting a little older. That's not exactly, absolutely outstanding. If we're being totally honest, Donovan Wilson sometimes makes some big plays, gives up a lot of big plays. Malik Hooker, I think, no offense to Hooker, he's sort of the average. He's just right at replacement level. He's not so bad you want to replace him, but he's not so good you feel comfortable with it. I think safety is a position they definitely would potentially get better at. They need some special teams help, long-term depth in that position. Clark gave him a lot of money for an undrafted free agent. Sort of a slow start, but building up steam. Definitely a guy to keep an eye on as we work into the preseason games itself and during training camp. If he can start making plays, I think he's a guy who can not only make the roster, but make an impact. Really liked him coming out of school. A lot of people did too, not just me. It was a very popular favorite, so I'm not going to give myself all the kudos there. All right, this is some injury updates from DallasCowboys.com. On one hand, they'll be glad to know All-Pro left guard Tyler Smith won't miss any time after leaving the previous practice. This is from Saturday, so it's a few days old. And soreness/tendonitis in his knee, given the injury to Rob Jones and Tyler Guyton, with Matt Valechko now waived/injured as well. The offensive line can ill afford more bad news, even with the signing of Lyle Collins and Jerron Christian. On the other hand, however, the running backs room is beginning to feel the sting of an injury bug, as Miles Sanders is expected to miss a couple days or so, per Brian Schottenheimer, with a knee issue. Deuce Vaughn is currently nursing a hamstring injury in the absence of Sanders, shifts opportunities to rookies Jadon Blue and Phil Maffa alongside Javonte Williams. Yeah, I think it's those. I know it's a lot of information there. Let's focus on the very end. It's the last sentence that matters. This is one of the things that can kind of happen where in training camp, and this happens college professionally, I saw it my time collegiately, is injuries will occur, little bugs will occur, and guys that should kind of get more opportunities because they're doing good things find a way to get more chances. I remember just my personal, this was spring ball collegiate, this was a number of years ago. I was having a pretty good spring game or a pretty good spring practice season, getting better, figuring things out. This was my sophomore year in college. And then a guy in front of me got on the depth chart, got dinged up for a couple days. Nothing serious, but I got a lot more opportunities, a lot more playing time, a lot more reps, and I really was able to show some good stuff and really impress the coaching staff, right? And so it's one of those things where it's this weird world where these little minor nagging injuries, like to Sanders, for example, presents guys like Jadon Blue, Phil Maffa, who are starting to do some good things, specifically Blue, starting to figure it out, make some plays. It gives them more opportunities. And I think one of the reasons, and I'm not saying there's any sort of conspiracy theory here, but I wouldn't be surprised if head coaches in these situations go to the training staff and they say, hey, what's Sanders like? Like, well, he's got a little bit of an injury. Maybe he'll miss a day or two. Let's make it 3 or 4 days. Let's not rush him back. Let's let him take his time and fully recover. Because in the back of his mind, he's like, I want to see more Jadon Blue. And look, I think he's doing good things, right? Blue is getting better and better and better. I love rookies that are starting to figure it out, right? Guys who come in and they start building momentum. They figure out the offense. They start figuring out how to play in the National Football League. Blue is on the trajectory, and I think Maffa's getting some more opportunities as well. This Thunder and Lightning rookie duo, again, Blue probably earlier. Maffa's going to take some time if he even makes the roster, although I think he will. We've got an interesting running back position to really focus on. Most people, again, outside of Dallas, look at the Cowboys running back room and they say, absolutely terrible. And look, I get on paper, it looks that way. But Blue's emergence paired with Maffa, there could be something special there. Definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, chugging right along. This is according to Joe Hoyt. He kind of listed his camp standouts so far, and 2 really jumped my eye. One of them is Kaiir Elam, and the only reason I bring this up is because Elam, to every single reporter, to every single coach, everybody has been crushing it, right? This is so rare to have one guy that shows up on everybody's list. Yesterday, I talked about how 2 reporters mentioned Shamar James, their rookie linebacker, was doing some really good things. And I'm like, hey, that's a good sign when you have corroborating evidence. Kaiir Elam's a guy where everybody says he's been doing great. From Hoyt's report, he said, I considered making this list in alphabetical order, then I figured I might as well just start with a person I think has stood out the most, and it's not just for his celebration ability. Former first-round picks, like Elam was out of Florida in 2022, usually aren't available for other teams this early in their career. That is, unless things didn't go well. That was the case for Elam in Buffalo, obviously. There were reasons to think that a change of scenery could do Elam well. However, the Bills changed schemes from one that fit Elam. His lack of opportunities resulted in a lack of confidence. That happens a lot, by the way. You're a young player. You're sort of a certain kind of corner or lineman or whatever it may be. You get drafted by a team that has a scheme. It's a great fit. Suddenly they change the scheme. Suddenly you're a bad fit. Suddenly you don't get confidence. It just becomes a disaster. It happens all the time. across the positions, all levels of football. It's one of the things. That's why transfers collegiately. You'll notice a guy who didn't play somewhere, was like a good recruit. Joe Burrow, Ohio State, good recruit. Doesn't do anything. Then goes to LSU and dominates. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about there. Even Bills general manager Brandon Beane took ownership after they traded him to Dallas for a late round pick and a pick swap, saying that it was on them, not Elam, for why it didn't work. Beane wished him the best. So far in Dallas, it's been completely different for Elam. He's had opportunities. He's made the most of them. He's been confident, sparked by consistent play since he arrived. He's been the one immovable object in the Cowboys' rotating secondary this offseason. He was fantastic in minicamp and OTAs, and he carried that over to camp, where he's had a team-high 3 interceptions and team drills. Elam looks like a surefire starter for the Cowboys. He's standing out on a regular basis. If he can do this in the regular season, it could be one of the better trades the Cowboys have made in recent memory. Yeah, it is sort of camp, so that's a big caveat, right? So to give you Cowboys fans an example, there's some reporting out of Chicago Bears camp about a corner named Nashawn Wright, guy you may be familiar with, some of you Cowboys fans, doing some good things. And they're like, hey, should Wright be a starter in Chicago? And I had to tell some of those content creators, I'm like, hey, listen, like you guys got to remember, there's a reason he was available. And there was a reason Elam was available. That being said, he's been dominant. And in terms of a secondary that has had issues, that's looking to figure things out, having a guy build his confidence as we get ready for the regular season is really important. Diggs will come back eventually, at the very latest, the end of September. If Elam can be just good enough to hold down that spot and just be better than the disaster that Andrew Booth was, trying not to be mean to him, but he was bad last year, that would be a huge win for Dallas. And again, just as a solid veteran depth piece, that alone makes a trade a win. If he actually becomes a quality starter, like Hoyt mentioned in the report, huge win, great trade for the Cowboys. All right, he also mentioned another guy. I just want to highlight Tyler Booker, first-round pick, and Hoyt had a report here. I won't go through all of it. It just highlights he's looking really good, doing some good things. Even when he was benched for a practice from Jones, just because they didn't like his performance, felt he took a step back. When he was on the second string that day, he quickly fixed all the problems. So again, he's reacting, he's learning, he's improving, he's getting better, he's starting to figure out. And Booker's a guy to me that a lot of people are starting to forget about. And this can kind of happen when a guy becomes a starter day one and as a rookie first-round pick, especially a lineman. He doesn't get all the buzz, right? You look at, Jadon Blue, for example, gets a lot of buzz, right? Being a playmaker. Phil Maffa gets a lot of buzz. Like guys like that, even veteran guys like Elam or things like that, playmakers, they make the plays, touchdowns, interceptions, whatever they may be, they get a lot of attention, a lot of immediate hype. But Booker, again, he's starting to figure it out, steady, consistent, integrating into the offense. Not going to be perfect like it never will be for a rookie. There's always going to be issues, but so far so good. This looks like a really good draft pick for the Dallas Cowboys. Again, I was not a fan of it at the time, but as time has gone on, culture fit, mentality fit, smart, hard worker, great program. This was a really good addition for Dallas. Excited to see what he does in preseason. Excited to start looking at some real film of this nice young offensive lineman out of Alabama. All right, moving on. This is sort of an interesting report, courtesy of Mike Leslie. Just an update on the Parsons situations, just because we have to talk about it. A source close to Micah Parsons and a Cowboys front office source both independently say there has been no movement today regarding Parsons' contract. No contact from the Cowboys to Micah or his agent, David Mulligetta. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones said yesterday that he has not spoken to Micah since his trade request went public on Friday morning. The Cowboys were off from practice today here in Oxnard, so this was obviously posted yesterday evening. All right, so a lot of people were a little concerned. What do you mean there's been no movement? Look, anytime a trade request is made and someone like Parsons or anybody in this situation puts a loud public statement out there saying, I want to trade, it's considered this massive either negotiating tactic or just a voice of frustration, you always give it, at least 72 hours of a negotiation. You always do, because emotions get high, a lot of volatility. Get everyone to calm down, take a step back, right? And then when you hear there's no movement, I think that's actually a good sign. Because if one side was drastically moving one way or the other, then there'd be, I think, a problem. Then that would mean there's something, an undercurrent there that is a seriously big thing, where this is a lot bigger than even people think it is. But the fact that everyone is, let's take a few days, let's let everything cool down, and then we'll rehash in, a week or so. I think that's the right approach. Parsons ain't going anywhere. He's at camp. He's at practice. It's not like he's, doing a TO with Philadelphia, working out in his driveway. So there's no massive distraction there in terms of outside what the media wants to make of it. The players are doing their thing. Schottenheimer's doing his thing. Across the board, Jerry Jones is saying, listen, they ain't really a big deal. This is, kind of par for the course. I'm not surprised at all that they waited for a few days, and they're going to keep waiting. Again, when there's a big trade demand, you just say, all right, listen, we're just going to stop, calm down, let these things simmer out. Anyone who's been in any big deal, any big negotiation, whether you had bought a house and things got a little testy or whatever, that, hey, when things get volatile, put it out there and then wait, take a step back and then rehash. I had actually, for my day job, I actually had a call with someone last week where he had a situation, business opportunity where things were going south. He was trying to figure out different situations. I said, all right, listen, man, let's meet for lunch next week. Let's give it a week. Let's think about it. Let's meet for lunch, right? Again, let things simmer down. Don't go overreactive with it. That's when bad things can happen. So that's what's going on here, both with the Parsons camp and with Jerry Jones and the Cowboys camp. Classic negotiation stuff. All right, which leads kind of into the next report. Kind of interesting, courtesy of Calvin Watkins, again, about the Parsons drama. He posted, interesting thing about Saturday's post-practice. I don't believe any Cowboys player talked to the media. Every reporter was around Jerry Jones or trying to get Micah Parsons to speak. So when I saw this report, I kind of thought for a second, if I was a reporter, why would I not be talking or trying to talk to Prescott or Lamb? Because what you're trying to get, if you're a reporter, trying to get a headline, trying to get buzz, you're trying to get clicks, right? That's obvious. That's the name of the game. So why would I not want to go talk to anybody, everybody? Just say, hey, what do you think about Parsons? You're trying to get someone to say, something bad about Jerry Jones or bad about Mike or both or whatever, right? But the fact that no one was, to me, I think this speaks to both Parsons and Jerry Jones's credit for some social media acumen. The fact that it's so public and just so out in their face and that they're both two very vocal guys, they've essentially insulated everybody else on the team, both Parsons and Jones. I don't know if this was by intent, but they've basically created this weird situation where usually when these things break down, it goes owner versus player, right? That becomes a dynamic that generally happens. And then it becomes owners versus players or management versus labor, right? That's traditional stuff. But here, there is that still going on. But here it seems, based on what's just happening right now, is that it's Micah versus Jerry right now, is the way it almost looks. Milageta versus Steven, right? It doesn't really feel like Cowboys ownership versus Cowboys players. Now, there is some solidarity the Cowboys players are having with Micah, which you would expect, of course. But it doesn't appear as if there's this, sort of team versus ownership kind of dynamic, this battle going on there. They basically, Parsons and Jones, have insulated the players, the coaches, the entire training camp discourse away from them. So I don't know if that was by design or not. If it was, credit to them. But I think this is one of the things that Jerry Jones has been effective in the past just by, I don't think it's by intention, honestly. I think it's just how he carries himself. Micah Parsons being a big outspoken guy in the media, his own podcast, things like that. I think this is just two guys that know how to use the media, and they just separated themselves from what's going on with the day-to-day Cowboys. And in a way, I think it's a good thing, right? You don't have players and coaches being asked about it. It's almost like there's two universes going on. There's the universe where the Cowboys are getting ready for the regular season and good stuff is happening. Not a lot of people are paying attention to that in terms of the big media. And there's this universe of Micah versus Jerry that everyone's paying attention to. The Micah versus Jerry thing, that's not really a big a deal. That'll work out, in my opinion. No one's paying attention to the Cowboys getting better, which, to be totally honest, I'm okay with. So I kind of like this news. I think this is a step in the right direction. All right, so this was a good comment, good post. A guy I recommend you follow, Dan Rogers, Danny Phantom 24. Kind of ties back to my stat of the day. He's got some good thoughts on some things. I like what he has to post on X. He said, the Commanders GM has been praised all offseason, yet their star wide receiver Terry McLaurin is demanding a trade. Did Adam Peters, the GM, suddenly stop being good? Or Sean Slater, who was drafted right after Micah Parsons, just got extended last week. Has the entire sports media been talking about that for months? No, they haven't, obviously. Last year's most expensive non-quarterback free agent, Christian Wilkins, just got released. Isn't spending in free agency a smart way to strengthen a roster? Is it possible that all the things you're mad at the Cowboys front office for aren't as egregious as you think? Correct. Everybody is having these same problems. It's just because it's Dallas. It goes back to my very first chart of the day where I highlighted, look at all these teams that have done more winning than Dallas over the past decade. Dallas 10th in winning. You've got teams like the Ravens, the Seahawks, the Packers, the Steelers. They've won more physical games, but they have no titles of anything to show for it, right? Where is the criticism? Where is the attack on their front office? It's just non-existent. But the Cowboys, it's nonstop, right? Again, you talk about two universes, right? Where you have a universe of teams that are winning a lot of football games, but not winning the big games in the playoffs or not winning a title. And then there's the universe where it's almost like there's a universe where there's this bucket of teams, and then there's the universe where there's only one team that ever happens to, and that's a fake universe. But the media, if you listen to the media, it's the Cowboys are only in that universe, right? It's like, oh, the Cowboys are the only team in the NFL that's winning games and not winning Super Bowls. And I mentioned in the beginning that, no, there's a bunch of other teams that are winning more games that aren't winning titles. Why aren't we focusing on them, right? And Rodgers is making a similar point here. The Washington Commanders, again, oh, the great culture change. This is phenomenal. Everything's wonderful. Everything's amazing. Their marquee marquee player, the player that stayed with the team, that took pay cuts when they were terrible to try to get the team better, now wants a trade publicly. Same thing as Micah Parsons, except even worse, to be honest. To me, this would be sort of like if Dak Prescott requested a trade, right? There would be that, and the Cowboys have been terrible for 6 years before it, right? If you go back in time, to me, let's see, just trying to think of an example. This would be if like if this Larry Allen, for example, when Bill Parcells came in 2002, 2003, if he requested a trade, or Flozell Adams, some great player that had been through a lot of losing over the past 3 or 4 or 5 seasons, things were starting to get better. Cowboys hiring Bill Parcells, all that kind of stuff, and then they wanted a trade, right? That's what this is equivalent to in Washington. Just a really bad PR thing, but no attention. They don't care. Why is that? Why isn't the GM getting criticized? Why aren't we talking about Adam Peters blowing this opportunity? We should be. We're not. Look, we talk about Rashawn Slater for the Chargers. They made the playoffs last year. They got Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert. We should be talking about the Chargers. They just now extended Rashawn Slater, right? When it's all said and done, in all reality, Slater, Parsons, selected right together in the draft, will be signed to an extension probably within a month or 2 of each other. No talk about the Chargers just taking too long, screwing up the situation with Slater. All talk about Dallas. What's going on there? And then, of course, the Christian Wilkins drama, which is crazy in by itself. But again, it speaks to the larger point. Because it's Dallas, people talk about it. And so when you see people in the media, when you see commentary and things like that from talking heads or online or whatever, understand, going back to my very beginning point, they're not doing it from a position of intelligence. They're doing it from a position of trying to get clicks and engagement. So let's try and be intelligent when we watch football, follow the Cowboys, follow the National Football League. Most people aren't, to be totally honest, and I think it's intentional, right? They could do the time, they could do the work, they could think for 2 seconds like Rodgers does here. This is a great example of it right here. But despite that, they don't. And so that's why you have to understand that it's not coming. The criticism of Dallas, even if it's warranted, isn't coming from a place of intelligence, of knowing football, of knowing the game, of knowing business, of knowing life. It's coming from a place of, my opinion, stupidity, or just trying to drive engagement, right? That's just my 2 cents. All right, let's get into the comments. Got a lot of comments from the video yesterday. A lot of interesting stuff here. This first one here is from JReal2646. Ownership isn't supposed to agree to any terms without the player's agent. It's against the CBA. Jones is completely in the wrong here. Talking about Jerry Jones and Micah Parsons, according to Gene Slater, agreeing in principle to a contract when just those two were, or terms of a deal, or however you want to define it, when it was just those two in person, and then Parsons going to his agent after the fact, and the agent then going to Jones and saying, hey, no deal, none of that's real, none of that's valid. I've heard both sides of this. I don't think it's against the rules to negotiate with a player directly, because we've seen players with their, Lamar Jackson had family members. Roquan Smith, I think, represented himself or had family members. So you can negotiate with players without their agent present. I think it happens all of the time. So I don't think it's a rule. I think it's one of those things where it's like strongly encouraged or they recommend it or something like that. I don't think it's a legal part of the CBA. I could be wrong. I'll take a fact check on that. So I don't think I think that's false. I think most players do. And to be totally honest, I don't think they should, right? A lot of these players, certainly the successful ones, in today's day and age, get a retainer from a big accounting firm in your city, a big legal firm in your city, have them run the numbers, the cash flow, financial projections for you, have your account drop paperwork your lawyer drop paperwork, insurance to protect you, and then pay them, $1 million there, $1 million there to retainer, and then that's going to be a lot less than the 10% a year you're going to be paying an agent who's all he's doing is, again, regurgitating information, contract information that you can get online today or with AI today. My personal opinion is that agents are going to be just obliterated soon. I think they're overpaid. I don't think they're worth the money at all in today's day and age. So again, I think we're actually going to see, believe it or not, a lot more players negotiating directly with management for contracts going forward because they don't need agents, right? I can go on the internet right now and see what any player should make, projected to make, top of market, bottom market, medium market, salary cap projections, current salary cap allocations, all that stuff at the tip of my fingers. Players have that too. They can do that without giving away tens of millions of dollars to an agent who's providing what kind of value again? I'm not really sure. All right. There's an interesting one here from Brian Draper 4818. He said, BS, Jerry Jones is not a good general manager. He sucks at it. He treats the team as his personal toy and not a professional franchise. Yeah, I don't think I ever said he was a good general manager, but you can make an argument. He's won a lot of games, finished top 10 in regular season wins over the past decade. So, in terms of leading the franchise for the most valuable, top 10 wins, That's not bad. The lack of postseason success, lack of Super Bowl titles, well, that's pretty bad. But to be fair, you look at good ownership, good management, Steelers, Ravens, Seahawks, whatever. A lot of the teams I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you're kind of like, well, they've got good management and they're winning games and they ain't winning titles either. So how much better or worse than they are than Jerry Jones? I don't know. Look, it's a zero-sum game. You win titles or you don't, right? You win titles, you're great. If you lose, if you don't win titles, you get lumped in with everybody else. And I think right now Jerry Jones isn't bad. I just think he's lumped in with everybody else, and he just loves media, right? So take that for what it's worth. This is sort of an interesting one here, kind of a good commentary. I love a lot of good comments here, a lot of smart people watching these videos, which I appreciate because I can learn from you guys. Talking about the deal with Parsons and Jerry Jones and the negotiating tactic, Jones kind of bringing Parsons in and working, trying to kind of bait him in a little strong arm to talk contracts. And SD Bruv commented, I can't speak for anyone else, but to me it's deeper. It's diabolical in nature because it's how he does business. Things I'm sure he wouldn't want to deal with if he was a player. And then Gary Easter 3017 responded, heck, a lot of other businesses do this. A lot of other do business this when they have a superstar on their hands. I think he's what he's trying to say. A lot of other businesses do this when they have a superstar. And I'll make this point here. You may not like what Jerry Jones is doing here, but I've read books on, as I'm sure most of you have, or heard stories of the great industrial titans, the Elon Musk, the Steve Jobs, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans, right? You go through history and you can say, okay, all these titans of industry, Thomas Edison, that sort of changed the world and invented the modern world and where we sit today. And you just look at what they did personally and how they managed and led, and it would be, for most people, ordinary people, we'd say that'd be diabolical. That's messed up. That's bad. That's really unethical. But they changed the world. So it's this weird dichotomy when it comes to managing and leading these big businesses and brands. Jerry Jones changed football forever. He's going to, it's what he's done with valuation, the Cowboys brand, and the NFL brand is absolutely incredible. He's one of the most important figures in NFL history, bar none. That's a fact, especially in terms of creating value for the league and for his franchise, of course. But he has been, in this instance, a little bit diabolical, right, to use your word, a little bit unethical maybe. So you have to kind of juggle both ends of the spectrum here. Steve Jobs was a jerk. People hated working for Steve Jobs. A lot of us have Apples. I've got a Mac right in front of me right now. So you kind of got to look at it and say, okay, would I trade all this cool stuff in this futuristic world we live in just to know that Steve Jobs wasn't a jerk? It's hard to say. Would we trade the NFL we know it today with all the, if the NFL wasn't as successful and making as much money, would we have Red Zone? Would we have all these cool things? You don't know, right? So I think you got to weigh the good and the bad when it comes to the morality of these kind of things. You can make an argument that it's not moral, and I would agree with that. Sometimes it's not, and a lot of times I'd say it's not good business. But you also have to understand is that kind of tactics can be usually what's behind people changing the world and changing our world and changing the country. So you have to sort of, kind of take both ends of it, right? If you're going to be just a dominant figure that's changing the history of the world, there's good and bad. There's no purely good, purely bad. There's good and bad. And sometimes that mix reveals itself, and that's what we're seeing here. This is from Safety Screw Market. Micah should absolutely never talk to Jones about the contract. This is what he shouldn't be in camp right now. This is part of the Jerry tactic. Like Zeke, he should be in Cancun somewhere, letting his lawyer handle all the details because that's what they're paid to do. Micah has handled this all wrong. Correct. And this is the point I made a couple times. Parsons made a mistake here. Now, again, he's a young guy. He's 26 years old. He's a football player, not a business guy. But he screwed up. And he got strong-armed into it. And that's where Jerry Jones, a diabolical nature, he screwed up. In Safety Screw Market, you're absolutely correct. He should, from a negotiating perspective, never gone to camp. It should be working out or sitting on a beach somewhere, whatever, and letting his team, his legal team, his financial team negotiate this directly with Prescott. And he should have been, with Jerry Jones, and he should have been doing that day one. And after he made the mistake, he should have come out publicly and said, hey, I screwed up. I talked to, and said this publicly and to Jones and to his agent. Say, listen, I talked to Jerry Jones. I was not acting in my best interest. He should have said this like March, April timeframe. I'm handing this over to my agent right now. No more conversation with me, and been very public about it. Now, he may have been a little embarrassed, or he may not have cared, whatever it may be. He made that mistake. And if that would have been handled that way back then, and certainly if that would have been the way now, the fact that he's at camp hurts his leverage. It makes things complicated. I think if he just hightailed it and left camp, in 2 weeks they'd agree and get Jerry Jones and the agent Miliqueta in a room together. I think this weird Parsons dynamic has created a challenge that we haven't seen in other contract negotiations. Great comment here from Safety Screw Market. Uh, This is from Big Boss Man 6855. I'm still blaming Jerry for 99% of the situation with Micah. The Jones keep dragging their feet when negotiating with their star players and always end up paying more than they could have. Owner Jerry Jones needs to fire GM Jerry and Steven and hire a GM that's competent at contract negotiations. He keep tripping up the team and preventing them from being successful. Yeah, I mean, this is something that Cowboys do. They do sort of drag their feet with negotiations. That's undeniable. We've seen it a number of times. There is this sort of belief you need to pay your stars and pay them early. There's a lot of people talk about that. I don't necessarily agree with that, just because there comes this weird world where you always have to end up paying. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So if you pay them early, if you pay them a year early, then you have to pay them again a year early. So instead of paying them in 2021, let's say if I pay them in 2020, a 4-year deal, then I have to sign them in 2024. I have to do it again in 2024 versus 2025. But the counter argument people say is, well, salary cap goes up and you should save money. I get that now. But if you talk to anyone that's been around for more than 5 seconds, anyone that's been involved in any sort of business, any sort of life, people that have been around for a long time, again, since like 2000, not been around since like 2015, we remember the period heading up to 2007, 2008, where everyone told us that housing prices would go up forever. They would never drop. They were just going to go up forever. And so people kept buying, the market kept churning, big banks keep investing, wholesale change, big, a lot of dollars coming in. What happens when prices dip? The market collapses, house of cards. You can't always assume, the lesson here is you can't always assume that just because things are going to go up, like the salary cap. Oh, the salary cap's going to keep going up. It may not always go up, guys. We may have a CBA that changes all of this. The NFL may do something stupid and they may pour $100 billion to expand into Saudi Arabia or something bonkers, and it may fail, right? Let's not say, well, the salary cap has gone up every year for the past 5 years. Let's not assume it always will. If you do that, bad things happen. The banks in 2008, the economy, the country, learned that the hard way. The Cowboys, actually, I think they're taking the right approach in a lot of instances. Now, they take too long, right? They take it to the far extreme where they spend like 5 years negotiating contracts. I don't think you do it early. I think you do it on time, right? Early is bad because you're extrapolating things to happen in the future that you don't know. Expecting things to happen that you don't know what's going to happen leads to disaster. At the same time, waiting to the last minute, that leads to disaster as well. Let's triangulate this, guys. Let's get right in the middle. Doesn't have to be super early. Doesn't have to be super late. I think there is some issues there. I think getting the timing better is the right approach, is the right answer, but it doesn't have to be super early either, because that will put you in some bad situations as well. All right, a lot of other comments here. I just didn't have time to get to them all. A lot of interesting things. So just keep commenting, guys. I'll do my best in the future to try and get to more of them. But all right, practice back at it today. Should be some more great news tomorrow. But until next time, I'm Nick, and this has been Saturday Morning Inspection.